Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us today. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's COP28 Presidency Press Conference. I'm Sara Al-Mahri, Director of Diplomatic Engagement at COP28, and I'll be your moderator for today. Before we begin, if you could please ensure that your mobile phones are on silent. We also kindly request that you hold your questions until the end of the session and that you limit your questions to one. Without further ado, let me introduce our panel of speakers. Ms. Yvonne Aki-Sawyer, Mayor of Freetown, Sierra Leone, Co-Chair of C40 Cities, Ms. Marusha Kardama, Secretary General of Sustainable Low Carbon Transport Partnership, Mr. Elkin Velasquez Monsalve, Regional Director of UN Habitat in Latin America and the Caribbean. Also joining us is Mr. Alex Sayre from the UNFCCC, who will participate in the Q&A. Ms. Yvonne, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning, everyone. Today is a very special day for cities. We're really thrilled that the multi-level action day is being recognized at this particular COP. Cities have been coming to COP for the last 15 years, but this is the first time that we have been recognized in the manner in which we have, and so we're very, very grateful to the COP presidency, to UN Secretary General, and I'll come on to the role of Bloomberg Philanthropies. Why does it matter? Why should cities be here? 70% of energy-related greenhouse gas emissions actually come from cities. 80 C40 cities, and for those who don't know, C40 is a network of cities, of almost 100 cities working on climate change. 80 C40 cities already have transition plans in line with the Paris Agreement. 75% of C40 cities are cutting their emissions faster than their national governments. Cities are at the front line of the climate crisis. City mandates mean that they are the first responders very often to the floods, to the fires, to the droughts, to the impacts of climate change. And given that they are also the source of so much of the emissions, it simply makes sense for us to have cities as part of the solution. That is why today is so important, but it's also why when on the 1st and the 2nd of December at this COP, a local climate ambition summit was held at COP for the first time. That is also significant and very important. And what's even more significant is that that was the forum for the launch of, wait for this, it's a bit of an acronym, as if we don't have enough acronyms, CHAMP, which stands for Coalition of High Ambition Multi-Level Partnerships. And I'm translating that to say national governments speaking to local governments. And this is very, very directed. The NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, have hitherto had some reference to cities, very much dependent on whose NDC it is. CHAMP has had now 64 signatories. 64 countries have signed up to say we will include climate actions as part of our NDCs. With what I said before in terms of cities moving faster, cities being at the front line, we are convinced, and big thanks to the COP presidency, Bloomberg Philanthropies, and the UN Secretary General for their leadership on CHAMPs. We are convinced that with CHAMP being implemented, we will see that improvement towards the meeting of the Paris Agreement actions. Climate consequences affect us all, but cities, as I said, are on the front line. CHAMP is a fantastic step forward. Finance needs to follow. Accountability and transparency needs to follow. But today, on a multi-level action day at COP, we as cities are grateful, and not just grateful, excited to offer our commitment, our ambition to the global climate space, to the global climate movement, and know that that will take us forward as a group. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yvonne. We'll now open the floor for one question, if any, directed to Ms. Yvonne, as unfortunately she will need to leave for another engagement. Any questions for Ms. Yvonne? All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Marusha, you have the floor.
Thanks very much. So I'm here to talk to you about transport. And one thing that I wanted to highlight about what's been happening at COP is what happened actually yesterday. Yesterday we had a transport and energy ministerial meeting. Of course, UN system agencies and international organizations were part of that meeting as well. And you might be wondering, why are we bringing these two sectors together? Well, let me give you a few figures here that actually would make the case of why we need to keep on working between transport and energy much stronger together. Transport is the fastest growing energy consuming sector. So fast that actually in 2021, it consumed around a third of the world's total energy demand. And the very bad news is that in that energy demand, 96% of it is covered with fossil fuels. So bringing together the transport and the energy sector is fundamental. Transport needs to reduce its energy demand, needs to use other types of fuels to power how we move people and goods around the world, and the energy sector needs to provide secure energy, different sources of energy to the transport sector. The energy sector needs also to go deeper into making certain type of infrastructure available. When we think about land transport, for instance, what we need is charging infrastructure for electric vehicles. Bringing these two sectors together is going to really multiply the strategies, but it's also going to multiply the economic, the environmental, and the societal benefits that we're going to see coming from that. So having yesterday here at COP, transport and energy ministers coming together for the first time was phenomenal, and they were discussing all these kind of things. It builds upon the first transport ministerial meeting that happened in COP Glasgow a couple of years ago. So certainly we need to commend the UAE presidency for continuing that trend of thematic ministerial meetings and this time around bringing transport and energy together at COP. The second good news that I wanted to share with you is also the call to action for doubling the share of energy efficient and fossil-free forms of land transport by 2030. That has been signed up already by more than 50 multi-stakeholder organizations. Watch out today, because we're going to be making a few announcements of the countries who are also joining that open letter. It has been initiated by us from SLOCAT, jointly with REN21, but also co-initiated by other organizations like IDRI, ITDP, UIC, UITP, and the WRI, the World Resources Institute. So for us, this is a very important COP. You hear a lot of talk about electric vehicles, which are certainly making a huge difference. A lot of cities in the globe are electrifying completely their bus fleets, and that is phenomenal. The story is not just about electric vehicles. There's a lot more happening, for instance, in land transport. With the pandemic, we saw a panoply of cities across the globe further pedestrianizing their cities, building a lot of kilometers of cycling lanes. We have seen as well a renewal in the idea of proximity planning. You might have heard, for instance, Mayor Anne Hidalgo in Paris talking about the 15-minute city. You might have heard about the proximity planning in general, for instance, the compact cities, the neighborhood blocks. All that is really making a difference in how we reduce the need for using a private car or for using any type of motorized vehicles around the world. We are also seeing a lot of improvement when it comes to cities being brave enough to establish low-emission zones or even ultra-low-emission zones to reduce the polluting vehicles that go in the very center of the cities. So this COP for us is fundamental for many, many reasons. Obviously, we were delighted to see COP starting with 118 countries pledging to triple the capacity of renewable energies, the amount of production of renewable energies. Now the next step is to look at who needs to consume that renewable energy, and certainly the transport sector is one of the primary clients, or should be one of the primary clients. We were also delighted to have the news about the Loss and Damage Fund. Now we need a chapter about transport in that particular work, because the amount of billions that are actually being total annually in the damage of transport infrastructures is huge. In low and middle income countries, it's $8 billion US annually that gets damaged in terms of transport infrastructure. But if you then look at the monetary impacts of that damage on transport systems, the figures go up to $180 billion US dollars in low and middle income countries. And last but not least, of course, we all have the eyes set on the global stocktake outcome. We are very pleased to see that parties are discussing about mentions to different themes and sectors. We know that it's not an easy conversation, but we would certainly like to encourage to keep all eyes set on some of the crucial things that are going to have to happen in this critical decade of action, with transport being one of them. And as I just told you, not only the deployment of electric vehicles, but actually the deployment of different technologies and different policies that are going to allow us to put sustainable low-carbon transport at the service of moving people and goods around the globe differently than what we are doing it today. Transport basically is not just about moving people from point A to point B. Transport is about livelihoods, is about economic regeneration and economic activity for many, many, many of us around the globe. So thanks very much for listening to us, and happy to take any questions, of course.
Thank you, Mrs. Kardama. Mr. Monsalve, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. We are here also expecting that we will be able to accelerate the action for mitigation, that we want also to advance on better adaptation, faster adaptation in the field. So today is a hopeful day because cities and multi-level climate action arrived to COP28. And this is thanks to the presidency of the COP28. We started last year in COP27 with the ministerial meeting on urbanization and climate. Today, we have the second ministerial meeting on urbanization and climate change. Having cities, having local stakeholders, having local communities in this process is one of the key elements to advance in an accelerated way. And we need to celebrate that. From a UN Habitat perspective, we are hopeful that we will continue, we will keep this process, and we will keep the key action of local authorities contributing to the process. Let me give you an example. Latin America and the Caribbean, we have 33 member states of United Nations making great efforts, trying to advance on mitigation, adaptation. Now they will be able to join forces with 16,000 local authorities to accelerate the actions towards mitigation, faster mitigation, and of course, better adaptation. The fact that member states are announcing that the NDCs are from now on going to integrate systematically the local actions, the local stakeholders, what cities are doing is also a matter of extreme importance for us seeing the process from the bottom up. There is also a very important point happening here at COP28 is the connection between the national action and the local action through the high ambition multi-level partnerships. This is a game changer in the process, and we expect from the international organizations, from local action, that this is going to be transformative. There is a gap, and the gap is in financing. Critical needs for climate finance remains in the field, remains in the global south, in local authorities, and this is also a very important point that local leaders are making here in Dubai at the COP28. Only 21% of the climate finance is allocated, for instance, to adaptation and resilience, which is the main need in the global south. And from this, only 10% is reaching the very local level. So we also recognize that there is challenges, but that there is also efforts to be made in the process of getting future effective action and implementation at the subnational level. Moving forward, COP29, COP30 are expected to continue this extremely important effort towards facilitating the integration of the local perspective. COP30 in Brazil, in Latin America and the Caribbean will be, of course, one of those moments where there is the expectation that the increased action and focus on people, in addition to nature and the lives of and livelihoods of those inhabitants in, for instance, the Amazon area in South America, this is going to be critical for the future of our planet. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you all for your remarks. Unfortunately, Ambassador Majid had been called away to another engagement, so we apologize for that. So do send the questions directed to the presidency to our media team. We will now open the floor for questions to our speakers. Before you begin, please state your name, media outlet, and who your question is directed to. Please, gentlemen, the first row.
Hi, Mr. Sear. John Gambrell from the Associated Press. The Wall Street Journal reported this morning that Russian President Vladimir Putin would be attending here today. Do you have any information about that? And separately, more broadly, if someone who is wanted by the ICC turns up at a climate talk with armed UN police, would those police be obligated to make an arrest? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question. I'm not aware that Mr. Putin will come to the conference, but I would also need to check with the host country, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but we have not been informed. On the second question, I would need to get back to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Next question. Any other questions? Please, gentlemen, the first row.
This is for Secretary General Gardam. Seth Borenstein, also the Associated Press. Any idea, since you're talking transport, how big it is, and this is such a large COP, how big a carbon footprint is the emissions of the 100,000 people coming here? How many of them are private jets? What kind of effect do having these COPs have on the planet, and is it time to start doing much of this virtually?
Thanks very much for your question. It's clearly, critically putting, I think, on the spotlight something that we love saying in the global transport community, the global sustainable road transport community. We like talking a lot about, I'm going to get a bit jargony here, but allow me to, you're giving me the opportunity. We talk about avoiding, shifting, and improving. Avoiding means avoiding the necessity of motorized trips. So reducing, isn't it, that demand for transport, and reducing the fact that we all go in a motorized car. Shifting means that instead of using your private car or a private jet, you go and use something that is collective, and that is public. So, you know, you put more people. You are not moving empty air, one person in a car. You're putting more people in a car. And then what you do is you improve. And improve means you electrify vehicles, you change the fuel type they use, you improve the way in which a vehicle is designed, for instance, in order to reduce as well its energy consumption. So indeed, reducing the amount of movement is needed. At the same time, because I don't want to duck off from your question, I think that we also need to look at what is it that we gain from having these kind of gatherings? What is it that we are doing when we are here together? To what point are we putting the spotlight at least once a year on what we actually need to be doing, and what it allows us to do, for instance, as NGOs, in terms of putting a bit of pressure on accountability in these kind of processes and making connections, and also bringing to these conferences not just the usual suspects that go in the conference and circuit, but also wonderful examples from the Global South and from low and middle income countries around the globe. So I think that, like in any big conferences, there's pros and cons. I cannot give you the figure of the footprint. I would love to know it myself, personally, of course, but I think that we probably need to put things into perspective. And I don't think there is a COP once a year the responsible source for the fifth of CO2 emissions that transport represents globally. What it is responsible for those emissions is the fact that on a daily basis, around the globe, people cannot go into public transport. The average access to public transport around the globe is around 50%. But when you go regionally, for instance, in places like in Asia or in Africa, it's going to be 36% of population, max, who are going to have access to public transport. Whereas me, where I live in Europe, 96% of us are going to have access. That is what is really going to reduce the footprint. And what is going to reduce the footprint in terms of how we move goods around the globe is to go more intermodal, is to be able to put those goods in different modes of transport as they make all the way from the production place to the place where they are consumed. And a lot that we have to do there, for instance, is on railways, is on really making a combination of electrified heavy-duty transport on roads with electrified railways. With that, we could be plummeting the CO2 emissions from transporting goods around the globe. So it's much more about, I think, the day-to-day, how we are on a daily basis moving people and goods around the planet, than on what we do once a year on a conference. Well, of course, at the same time, I do have views about, how we treat the footprint emissions of any big gathering. But I think that the attention has to be put on how do we build infrastructure and how we give access to mobility on a day-to-day to people in different ways than what we're doing it today. Thanks for your question. It allowed me to explain a bit more of I think, what's the, the devil in the detail about transport. Thank you.
Please, we'll take the next question in the fourth row, I guess.
Okay. Hi, my question is for you, Maroxa, again, sorry. You made a comment about brave, I'm Caroline from Argus Media, sorry. You made a comment about brave cities, city being brave, when they do actions to reduce car footprints, including lanes, cycle lanes, public transport, they face massive backlash. Why is that? And what can be done to avoid this backlash that's often fueled by populism, which is hindering progress clearly?
Thanks for the question. I mean, when a mayor, it's a pity the mayor had to leave us, because probably she could relate to this, I think, very, very much. When a mayor takes the very difficult political decision of saying that I'm going to reduce, the type of cars that can go in the center of my town, and some of them are already doing it for trucks even, for freight, it's really a tough political decision. It requires a lot of courage. You can only do that if you bring your population along. A lot of what happens still nowadays, and allow me to be the NGO I am here, in this panel. A lot of what happens lately, or has been happening for decades, is that we have associated the ownership of a private car with social status. It's about whether I've been or not successful in life. And that, I think that's something that happens a lot in European countries, in global north countries. We are still trapped in urban form, in the shape of cities that were built for cars decades ago. And what we need to do is start building our cities and transforming our cities for people. But what we are seeing as well is that the rocketing percentage of car private ownership in certain parts of the globe, for instance in Asia, is concerning. And it all goes linked together. It all goes linked with giving access to all the modes of mobility, giving access to public transport. So I think that a lot of the backlash is about cultural habits, it's about behavioral change, it's about how we associate the way we move with the way we are successful or not in life. There is a wonderful example of a mayor in Africa, as the mayor of Kelimane, that ran his election campaign on a bicycle motorcade. And everybody was saying like, you're never going to win, you're a poor man, look, you're moving around on a bike. When everybody else moves on a very big motorcade of very big cars. Well, the mayor won the election and has been winning the election for a while, for a few mandates. And actually, he made it on the press because he was followed by a motorcade of bicycles, thousands of bicycles, around the city. And he has actually changed the way his city moves today. So I think it's very much about that. And of course, that is not going to change over time, absolutely. But that sort of behavioral change, that sort of bringing population along is what we are actually going to have to put our efforts on if we want people to move differently, and if we want to support courageous mayors in being able to take the very difficult decisions of restricting the way in which we move in certain cities, to actually make it less polluting, to make it healthier at the end, and to make it more about community building, about place making, about social cohesion. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Kardama. We'll take one final question. So if there are no questions, we will conclude today's press conference. I'd like to express my gratitude to our speakers for attending and for all of you here with us today, and look forward to seeing you again on Friday at 9:30 a.m. Once again, thank you very much and have a great day.
Just I have one quick announcement. No, sorry.
Sure, Alex.
No, just to tell you that Executive Secretary Simon Steele will do a statement around 1 o'clock today for the media. It will most likely happen outside Plenary 1 in the foyer at this position. Oh, I think he will summarize the first week and give you an idea where we are and where we go or need to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.